Hello and welcome to another episode of Upward Trajectory. Today, I'm really excited to introduce the guest that we have, Dai Manuel. He's got a fantastic story of overcoming adversity and really changing the whole trajectory of his life and in a positive way. And without further ado, I'd just like to introduce him and get right into it. So welcome, Dai, to the program. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's an absolute pleasure. I think it's lovely. The stories you're spreading. We were talking before you hit record. The fact that just with what we've been experiencing globally, I think these are conversations that more and more of us need to be privy to, and ultimately have an opportunity to see how our own lives parallel a lot of these stories, because we all have these stories. We do.
Everybody's got them. Yes,
But
we've
they
all
really
got
do.
things
Yeah.
we're dealing with.
Yeah.
100%.
Exactly. Mm.
Yeah, well, we had a conversation a few weeks back, and I was just really drawn in by your story. And I love that you took, you embraced and you talk about the negative, but in a means to, I started in a place that was bad, but look where I'm at now. And I would just love for you to share that.
Well, sure. And I like people to know this. When people wonder, like, the industry I've been in most of my adult life has been the health and wellness space. And when people find out that I'm so passionate about fitness, especially because I look at fitness as a wonderful conduit to change health. Like, if we want to impact our health in a very, very quick way, just starting to move our body with purpose, start, changing how we fuel ourselves. Those two little things alone can start to create massive shifts for people
Absolutely.
internally, which leads to and feeling better, being able to manage stress better, sleeping better. Like, all these little things start to compound in a very positive way. I find health and wellness space, for so long, they just presume that I've probably always been a healthy and fit or active person. And that's not the case. I actually was morbidly obese as a teenager. I was really overweight. Uh, and I tell this to people, and I don't want them to feel sorry, because I don't feel sorry for me. And I'm not looking for pity, but I am looking for understanding and also empathy, because I can empathize with a lot of individuals that are feeling that way, based on choices or lack of choices. And in my case, it was both. From the age of 9 to 14, I just played a lot of video games, watched a lot of movies, ate a lot of foods that were fairly poor in nutrition value, but high in calorie, right? And
Right.
so a lot of sugar sweetened beverages, a lot of real carby, refined foods. And for 5 years of doing that repetitively, well, of course, my body shifted, but so did my mind. I was very depressed. I was withdrawn. I was dealing with health complications, like asthma and excess inflammation in the body. So I had achy joints, all the usual cliches that we associate with that state of unhealth. And the weirdest thing is when I was going through it, you don't ever really realize just what's happening to your body, because you learn to just, like we all do, and especially for my own situation, as challenging as we may find situations in our lives, it's amazing that the longer we endure them, we build up this sort of a wall. We build up a tolerance, if you will. And for me, my tolerance level was very high with feeling unhealthy, feeling unhappy. It became my new normal. So when it's your new normal, you forget what it's like to feel the opposite.
Right.
and, and,
Right.
and that can be hard, right? Because then we're like, well, this is just the way it is, and we move on and we just try to get through it. And it was in those moments when I'd be by myself, not with family or not being distracted by a device or a screen. Uh, you know, it, that's when it was most challenging. There was one day when I was 14 years old. I remember getting out of the shower, and I used to have a little bit of a hack where I would stay in the shower extra long, so the condensation, the steam from the shower, would always fog up the mirror. So that way, when I got out of the shower, I never have to look at myself in the mirror.
Oh, wow.
and that was my hack. Also back then there was very few photos of me. I've got about 2 that I know of that my mom was able to dig out of storage, that showed my state at that time, and that morbid obesity. And that got out of that shower that morning, but I had to have a quick one. My dad was busy getting my brother and I out for a day, and so I had to rush. And I remember coming out of the shower and just looking myself in the mirror, and locking eyes and top to top, stopping at the midsection, and just, it was utter disgust. I really know who was looking back at me, and I felt very helpless in the moment. And there was a lot of emotions that came up, and because everything just sort of comes to a halt, right? Like it compounds day after day after day, but eventually you get to a point where it's like, okay, I can't tolerate this anymore, and some people call it a breaking point, or they call it, you've hit rock bottom. And, my family cared for me greatly. I didn't have any needs, like really any wants that went unfulfilled. My parents were very caring and loving, and still are. Well, my father passed a few years ago, but regardless, you would think that things would be different, and you expect things to change. A lot of times, I was expecting things to change. And then I just realized that, I had these ideas of, what's the point of living? Like, is this what my life's meant to be? Because, at that point, it's like, okay, well, I've been like this for a long time, most of my life, really. Because at that time, 14 years old, 5 years of which was spent in that state. It's like, oh man, a whole third of my life I've been like this. And
Wow.
will it ever get any better? And these are real things, real questions, real dialogue that's happening in a lot of our minds when we're going through really challenging emotional battles, we'll call it, right? Internally, especially. And I found myself becoming very fearful. To be perfectly honest with you, Jennifer, I was really afraid of the idea of death, and more afraid of that than the idea of actually changing. I like to invite people, like when they've gone through their own personal changes and they get to that, sort of a fork in the road where it's like, I could have gone right or I could have gone left, but I knew for a fact I wasn't going to stay in one spot. I was going to maintain that movement or that journey. And now it's like, okay, I've got these choices. And for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm either accept who I am and stay on this path and I know where it's going. I'm not exactly looking forward to it, but this is a reality. Or I could start trying to change things. I could start trying to deal with the issues at hand and educate myself, find mentors, coaches, people that can support me in the change, so it's not as daunting, not as scary. Because we're conditioned to be fearful of things, aren't we?
Absolutely. And it's fear that drives
Yeah.
a lot of things. That's a core emotion that drives a lot of things in the wrong direction. And I know so many people caught up in it, and it's very hard to not only realize that, but then to realize, okay, where do I start to counteract that? So at 14, that's such a profound way of thinking to, well, first of all, just, noticing that you need to change and making the decision that you need to, but then the thought of I need to build a network around me. Like I wouldn't think most people as adults would think that way, but as a 14-year-old, I'm very, very surprised you had that revelation at such a young age.
Well, thank you. And I like to think that others in similar situations with similar experiences and similar inputs would probably experience things very similar to how I did. And I say that because I know people have overcome tremendous challenges in their lives. I mean, we can't help but hear amazing stories that are very inspiring. And I know back then, I was, to be honest, more afraid of not changing than changing. It became very clear that, okay, well, I've got a couple fears here. I'm afraid of trying to do things completely different to change my situation, but I'm also more afraid of not doing anything and having to accept that this may be the rest of my life.
Right.
That because we have to admit to ourselves that if I don't actively do something to make things better, they probably won't. Do you know what I mean? Like it probably won't.
Absolutely.
And we have to accept that truth. And it's like, okay, well, I have to either accept it fully and be okay with that, or do something about it. And I think there's a series of questions that a lot of us go through when we encounter big changes,
Yeah,
big
and
changes.
the
And
real I
yeah,
would
go
say the
ahead.
realization of, what I've been doing is not serving me in the way I want to be served, and to,
Yeah,
say, okay, I've got to make a change. That's
exactly. And something to consider, Jennifer, and for those that are listening or watching this, there's three questions I always like to invite people to ask themselves when they recognize that there's something that's limiting them from either experiencing more happiness, more fulfillment, more joy in their life. If there's something that's limiting that part of your life, well, you have to ask yourself, like, am I okay with that? And I think most people are not okay with it, but I like to ask them, are you okay with that? Or would you like to see things get better or change? Or would you like more of that in your life? And if the answer is yes, great. Well, here's three questions for you. First question is like, can I do this? Like, can I actually create the change or live the change that I want? I mean, so for my instance, it was like, can I lose this weight? Can I do this? And there was so much social proof out there, like just watching on the TV. I mean, I remember my mom was a big fan of, what was his name? Simmons, like Sweating with the Oldies guy.
Oh,
Big,
yes.
you remember
Richard Simmons.
Richard Simmons? Thank you. So she's a big fan of him, right? The Sweating to the Oldies.
Oh,
But he was
he was
like
a positive person, very positive energy,
extremely,
encouraging of everyone, regardless of their
yes,
situation. And that was,
yes.
I think, key to how he got so many people so motivated.
He really did, but it was neat because his own personal story too. He was like someone that was extremely overweight, and he just started dancing to music, right?
Yeah.
And really changed his life. But it was just neat because that was one of the first real big names that I remember on the Arsenio Hall show. Like I'm totally dating myself right now, but I remember these things, and I remember just the impact of seeing him on the TV and hearing my mom speak about him and see how he motivated her. And so I knew that there was other people out there that have experienced these types of changes, have been able to release this weight from their lives and literally change things. And so when you ask yourself, can I do this? It's like, well, can I do this? Yeah, well, I can get education. I can get support. Like in my case, I went to the library. I got books out on fitness and nutrition, and it's really a matter of education. So when you ask yourself, can I do this? It's like, well, can I learn how to do things differently than I'm doing them now? And if the answer is yes, then we move on to question two. And it's like, well, if I do this, will it work? Because I think a lot of us are concerned, right? But we're used to this nowadays. I mean, how many of us, especially in the weight loss space, right? Like fitness is known for this because a lot of people get very discouraged by it. It's like, well, I've tried this diet and I've tried this diet. I lost weight, but then I gained it back, and so it beats us down. We get
It
to a point
does.
where we're like, gosh, why even bother? I already know that I'll get results, but then I'm going to lose everything that I gained. And it's because lifestyle hasn't actually adapted. It's more of a band-aid solution, but that's another conversation. But what I'm saying was that second question is like, if I do this, will it work? It's like for myself, it was like if I start to move my body a little bit every day, because that's more than I was doing, and I
That
start
first
to
step.
right, exactly, the first step,
It
and
really
and
is.
if I start to change how I eat, specifically, if I change the type of things that I'm putting into my body, will this actually have a positive effect? And I'm looking at everybody else that's done this kind of stuff, and I'm like, well, it's worked for them, so why wouldn't it work for me? So, you start doing that, and it's like, so if I do this, will it work? Well, the answer was yes. So now I've got a yes and a yes, right? So anybody can use the same framework. The third question, though, and this is the one I think that challenges all of us the most because it involves a different part of the brain to answer the question. But the question is it worth it?
Ah,
Is it worth it? And really, I'd love to challenge people to reframe it into, am I worth it? And this value proposition, this internal belief, it's a different part of the brain, as Simon Sinek says, right? It's the why part of the brain.
mhm.
It's that emotional connection to the reasons that we're doing the things that we're doing. Some people call them intrinsic motivations, and I like to call it both intrinsic and extrinsic. So it's both outside of us and inside of us, but it's that emotional connection to both. And so when you get to that point and you're like, well, yeah, I'm worth this. Heck yeah. Like now you've got three big yeses in your favor, and that's where change really becomes possible. And that internal belief that we can do it, because that's really what it comes down to. It's all a mindset to get things started,
It
and to
really
keep it
is.
going.
Yeah.
So we have to give ourselves some yeses. We have to be able to get those little dopamine hits to help fuel our motivation as well as our inspiration to travel the journey. And this applies like in any sorts of changes that we want to create in our lives. In my case, it's happened many times, yes, early on, childhood obesity, but then later on in life with alcohol abuse and drug abuse, and even carried forward dealing with social anxiety, and then now working as a professional speaker. I do keynotes and emceeing, but from a guy that would clam up and feel extremely anxious and stressed and not be able to speak in front of even a group of a half dozen people. But those were things that I recognized were limiting me in my potential in life. And so I said, okay, well, what do I have to do to make these situations, these challenges go away? Or I'll be honest with you, a lot of time they don't go away. They're still there, but you learn how to deal with them in a much more productive way. And in my case, it's like every time I'm about to speak in front of a group, oh man, my palms get sweaty, my heart rate goes up. I'm like, right? But I've learned how to channel that energy now into a positive way to support me and to allow me to connect with people. But man, I'm still scared, like straight up.
The number one fear, public speaking.
Yeah, well, it is, right? But I said, okay, I know I've got a story. I know I want to impact people. I want to help people. I want to inspire. I want to motivate. I want to educate. I want to do it in a fun way. And I knew one of the most effective ways to do that was to be able to speak in front of groups, to be able to share a message. And so I found a group called Toastmasters just over 10 years ago. And it was instrumental in supporting me. And because there's always groups out there, there's always associations. There are so many ways for us to seek support.
Absolutely, there are. We just need to seek them.
But it is something we want to change, and we need. Yes. And I know this probably sounds like a broken record. I'm sure people have heard this all the time, but hopefully, all I want to say is that everything I've done and these little challenges I've overcome that were in my life, it's my journey. But if you're thinking right now and you're hearing this and you're like, oh man, I've got similar things. Yeah, I know you do. Okay. Because we're all on this journey, and Joseph Campbell called it the hero's journey, and we're all on it. We're on these journeys, and it is a life. We're born, and there's some point when we leave, leave this mortal coil, as Shakespeare said. But it's the stuff in between that makes life beautiful. And that's us, that's who we are. We are the stuff in between, the time when we're born, the time we die. There's all that stuff in between. So what are you doing with it?
Yes,
what are the trials and tribulations that you are challenged with? It's okay. That's part of life. It's part of growth. And the cool thing is there's lots of other people out there that are on similar journeys that are willing to support us when we find ourselves in those tough situations. And it's just being willing to seek out the support. And there's so many people out there. There's so many resources. And that's the one thing I got to say, with this global pandemic that we've been experiencing, globally, so many people have come to support others.
I love that too. And
I love
that your third question ties in the emotion. I feel that the main reason I'm doing this podcast is to evoke emotion. And when you evoke emotion in people, that's when you become, or that's when a catalyst to change happens.
Yes.
And I love that that's their third question, because that is what you hold on to. That's what gets you through the tough times. When you wake up and you're like, I'm not seeing anything yet, but I'm going to keep going because I'm holding on to this emotion. And it's so powerful. And you've got to harness it in the right way. And I love that. I feel your energy come through. I feel your passion. I feel your need and your want to help people. I'm in the same place. I want to do that too. And it's such a powerful way to give back, to help other people.
Yes.
It's just amazing. I love your story, Dai. So if people want to hear more and they want to, do you have a web page or a site that they can go to learn more?
Yeah. Well, the interesting, so I've had a couple transitions. Like I left a 17-year corporate career. I was a founding partner for a company. And, after 17 years of doing that, I just realized that things had to change again. Like we do grow in so many different ways. And I think that's one of the scariest things of us as we age and as we mature, as we collect more experiences, we grow and our needs change.
Grow.
Yes. But one thing that remained constant was a Japanese philosophy called ikigai, and this idea of it's really the reason we get up in the morning. And I found that the reason I was getting up in the morning was shifting. So before I was serving a lot of people through my retail operations, and I felt very connected to that. But then things started to shift, and so I left that career. You know, we my wife quit hers a month later. We pulled the kids out of school. We started traveling because we wanted to be a full-time family. We wanted to experience life a little bit differently. People thought we were nuts. You know, we spent the last 2.5 years living in Bali, Indonesia. We just
Wow.
relocated back to Canada. Like lots of cool things happened, but we had no plan B, you know, and I'm only sharing this because when you start to look at my platform, there's a lot of shifts that are always happening there. And I invite people to be part of that conversation because I think everyone's experiencing that in their own way. You know, we're experiencing challenges all the time. We're feeling drawn to facilitate changes in our life because we feel something deep down that like we're meant to be doing something more.
Yes, and a lot of people can attest to that feeling like there's
Yes.
something missing. I
Yeah.
know that there's more, and it's
Yes.
that you wrestle with that sometimes when you contemplate life. Like, there's got to be more to it. There's got to be something that, I have to have more of a purpose than what I'm living out right now. I think a lot of
Yes.
people grapple with
Oh,
that.
and there's one great book, and then I'll share some of the ways that people can connect with me. But there's a book that I just reread, and it's by Viktor Frankl,
Ah,
and it's called Man's Search for Meaning.
I love
And
that book.
it is
Talk
one
about
of the
profound.
oh
I mean,
oh
if
it is
he can look at his situation and find positive, that's the epitome.
yes. And I invite people, if you've never heard of logotherapy, to look it up. He's considered sort of like the granddaddy of logotherapy, which is this really is this idea of connecting with our purpose, you
Yeah.
know, and the more clarity we have around what is our purpose, it's Nietzsche. I mean, he said, you know, with a strong enough why, we can endure anyhow.
Yes.
You know, and I think that is so profound. And you know, in my 20s, even into my 30s, I wouldn't have resonated with that as much. But, you know, Dr. Wayne Dyer talks about this thing as we approach 40 called the shift. And I very much acknowledge that because I think it's interesting. I always equate it to this. Like, I like uh, metaphors, you know, or analogies, if you will. Imagine when we're born, we had a clock put on the wall. You know, it can be digital, analog, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's a clock on the wall. But when we're born, it counts up. But there
Uh-huh.
comes a point in our life where that clock starts to count down, you know? And when the clock starts counting down, we realize that time is just passing, you know? And it's like, well, what are we doing with what we got left? And, uh, and I think that is the thing that always gets me going. You know, it's like, geez, well, if this was my last day on earth, what the heck would I be doing right now? Would I be doing what I'm doing right now? You know, and it's a powerful question, right? Like, so I invite people think about. I've shared lots of different questions today, and these are just the questions to ask yourself. Give yourself permission to have that internal dialogue. You know, just to
Great questions.
reflect, to introspect, to be okay with what might come up. And if you don't know the answers, that's okay. There's great coaches, there's mentors, there's some people out there that are creating amazing content like you, Jennifer, that speaks to this. So I tell people just immerse yourself in it and you'll be surprised what comes up, you know. And I do have a blog. It's daimanuel.com, just my name. And there's over 1,500 articles on there that are all about how to help get more out of life. You know, they're all lifestyle orientated articles. And then if you want to find me on social, it's really easy because it's just my name, Dai Manuel, Daimanuel. It's first name's Welsh, last name's Portuguese, but I'm Canadian, and but I'm easy to find on social. But I'm most active on Facebook and Instagram, so I always like to let people know that. And but I invite people, just reach out to me. Hey, I heard you on Jennifer's podcast. How you doing? I thought that
Wonderful.
was really cool. This is the question I thought was best. You know, like whatever, just reach out to me. I'm a I'm a real person, and I'm here to have a conversation. So I like people to know I'm very accessible.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for your questions. I love those questions. I love the way that you have to take a step back and just ponder. And, that's and evoke that emotion and then get excited and get energized about what you're going to do next.
For sure.
Wonderful. I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast, Di. It's been great. It's been insightful. It's been inspiring. So please reach out to Di if you've got his information. I'll leave some below if you're watching. And please join us again for another episode of Upward Trajectory in the near future. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's amazing what you're producing in the world, and I know this. Gosh, all it takes is one listen, right? the
It
right
just takes
person at
one
the
catalyst.
right
That's all it
time.
is. It's
That's
just
it.
hearing
It's like,
what you need at the
oh,
right time. That's what it is. Absolutely.
it's incredible. It's incredible. So thank you for the opportunity, and extremely honored and looking forward to being a regular listener.
Thank you so much. Take care.